I heard a few of you up there when I was talking to the kids going, How many of you disobeyed your parents? You notice I did not look back at the parents of any of the kids, or any of the grandparents of any of the kids that were up front when I said that. I wasn't going to have them incriminated. But it's something that I need to look at. Wow, what a first chapter. I'll tell you what, I continue to be blown away as I get into the story. It's like, and we're going to cover how many chapters in Scripture? And no, we're going to cover the entire Bible, but they've condensed it down to the point of 31 chapters that we're going to go through and to be able to learn more about God. And this journey through the book, the story, is kind of like a movie. You ever walk into a movie late? You sit there and you just go like, well, the movie's supposed, and he said 1 o'clock, which means they're probably going to have previews and commercials and everything else until about 1:15. And then you start thinking 1:15, and then you show up about 1:20, 1:25, and all of a sudden they're 5 minutes into the movie and you're thinking, what the heck happened? Where am I at? What's going on here? And it takes you half the movie to try to figure out what's going on. That's where we are today. We're at the beginning of a feature-length movie, and if you miss today, if you miss what God is talking about today, and not be able to make those connections, you're going to be running to catch up, and you're going to spend half the time reading through the Bible going like, well, why is this happen? Well, why did that happen? And somebody says, oh, go back to Genesis 3. No, why did this happen here? And we'll go back to that, and we need to, so today is going to kind of give us the reasons behind much of what we're going to learn about through the next 31 weeks. The story starts with the Big Bang. And I kind of broke it down into 4 areas, and hopefully it'll help us understand. The first one is this. The Big Bang of creation. The Big Bang is not an impersonal accident, but a creative purpose from a personal God. A lot of times you'll hear the word the Big Bang and you just think, oh, that's the scientific community's non-believing terminology for, okay, something just happened and it just exploded and it turned out to be this way. I had a friend of mine try to explain that whole concept to me because I was having difficulty wrapping my head around how there could be one explosion and everything turn out the way it is. And he said, Rich, oh no, it's real simple. He said, you remember the old print shops where they had the little tiny characters and they had all the different fonts and the different sizes? They had them all lined up? I said, yeah. He said, now picture an explosion in that print shop. I'm like, okay. And he says, now all those little characters flew up in the air during the explosion and came down on the press and landed in perfect order and wrote a book. There's your Big Bang. I thought, man, that really makes it even worse to try to get a hold of. But in the opening verse of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, we get introduced to the most important person in the Bible. The first 4 words of the Bible. You know? In the beginning, God. That's a good way to start. That's a good way for us to start. It is not just an event that happened with no rhyme or reason. It truly is a creative purpose of a personal God. That's creation. Days 1, 2, and 3, places that God created. You look at the first three things. You've got the light and dark, you've got the sky and the water, and you've got the land. Last week you watched a video of a spin-off on the game show Jeopardy! And you saw how maybe some of us don't exactly have the biblical knowledge that we should. Well, one of the things that a friend of mine does is he makes sure that he gives all of his confirmation kids a pre-test. Aren't you glad we didn't do that? Huh? Yes. Ready said, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so he gives them a pre-test so he knows what they know. And it's like, okay, we'll hit on those things, but let's focus on the things that you don't know. So on day one, he says, what happened on day one of creation? He said, okay, that was light and dark. Then it was what happened on day two? Sky and water. Okay, what happened on day three? Silence. He says, oh, come on, what happened on the third day? And one of the kids go, Jesus rose from the dead? Okay, that's, you're right, but that did happen on the third day. But, okay, days 4, 5, and 6. Those were things that were created to fill the places that God had made in days 1, 2, and 3. Sun and moon, birds and fish, animals, and human beings. The whole story of the creation of human beings is occasionally misrepresented. Some guys were talking in the back of church one time, and they were talking about the minister had just preached on Adam and Eve and everything. And one guy says, the minister didn't exactly quote the way I understand creation story. I said, well, really? What is that? He says, my understanding, my wife's Bible says, God caused the man to fall asleep and took out his brains and created woman. That was one of those translations I missed out on, I guess. And, we just, and then the other story, the little boy, he had heard the creation story, and his teacher saw him doing this. He says, teacher said, what are you doing? He says, I want to find out if I got a wife. I think, we get this all kind of goofed up. And, we have to realize, we have to go back to those first 4 words that were so important. In the beginning, God. God started this whole thing off. And we need to be able to understand where that's going to lead us. And if you look at the creation of human beings, you realize there is a passion that God has for you and for me. Look at Genesis 1, chapter 26 and 27. It says, then God said, let us make people, human beings, man, or whatever your translation says, in our image, to be like ourselves. They will be masters over life, the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, the wild animals, the small animals. So God created human beings in His own image. God patterned their design after Himself. Whoa. God created it all. But you and I are designed after God. I don't know, but I think I just ought to stop there and kind of let that soak in. That's a pretty amazing fact for us to just kind of understand that God created you and He created me in His image. All the beauties of creation. The stars in the sky, the oceans, the mountains, the animals, the fish, the birds, all are secondary to you. We sit and we look. I love to look at pictures of wildlife and then creation, and I look at some of the gorgeous pictures that you can just drive through the countryside here and see those. And you're just amazed. And then to think, God made me in a position that nothing else in all of creation can claim. I was made in His image. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes there are times where I feel like I'm pretty beat down. There are times where I feel like I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. Maybe my self-worth is in the tank, and I just don't know what to do. Go back and read this Genesis 1 again. Obviously, we've got to be worth more than anything else in the entire universe because you and me were created in the image of God. That's huge. And if anything is going to uplift you and encourage you, that fact should encourage you in your life and in your walk. There is a second Big Bang. And the second Big Bang is rebellion. There was a Big Bang. After creation, there was rebellion. Adam and Eve. We know the story. Adam and Eve were created with love, and they were created with freedom. Adam and Eve were created in such a way where God did not force them to love Him. They didn't have to do everything that God said. They were given a choice. And they chose not to follow what God had told them to do. Genesis 2, starting in verse 9, talks about the Lord planted all sorts of trees in the garden, beautiful trees that produce delicious fruit. And at the center of the garden He placed the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God made it very clear. You may eat freely of any fruit in the garden except the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat of it, you will die. Now, I don't know how that whole thing strikes you, but I know how it does as a parent. And those of you who are parents probably understand this. Aaron, don't go over there. Where's the first place Aaron went? He went over there. Really? We go out? He took off and he went exactly where we told him not to go. Seriously? We should have used reverse psychology. Aaron, go to church. Well, that would have been what we wanted. Maybe if we used reverse psychology, it would have been, Aaron, don't you dare go to church. And don't you dare sit in that front row where your old man can keep an eye on you. Don't you dare go there. You know where he'd be sitting? He'd be sitting right next to Nancy. It's crazy. What is it about us that causes us to do what we're told not to do? Adam and Eve rebelled. That big bang of rebellion, they rebelled against God. They knew what they should do. Some people will sit there and look at that story and they'll say, well, they didn't die. Oh, yeah, they did. They died to the image that God had created and changed their entire being. If you will, Adam and Eve changed the DNA of human beings in one bite. that quick. And this story sets up the entire rest of the book. Like I said, you come in 5 minutes late, you got to catch up, right? Well, you didn't. You're here. It's not catch-up time. But if you miss the concept in these first couple chapters, you're playing catch-up, and it's not all clicking. So hopefully we'll be able to see how this impacts us and God's creation and our world and our story as we continue on. There's another Big Bang. The Big Bang of sin's damage to God's creation. I know some of you are golfers. Very first time I went out to play golf, I learned a new word. Mulligan. Thought it was an Irish drink. I didn't know what the heck a mulligan was. And somebody explained it to me. And they explained it to me when I had gotten up to the first tee and I took a swipe at the ball and it went and landed on the green on the 18th hole. Thinking. The guy said, oh, take a mulligan. Do a do-over. Oh, I can do that? Well, no, but go ahead and do it anyway. God had gotten to the point because of the evil in the world and that change of the DNA of human beings that he was sitting there going like, I gotta have a do-over. Now, think about that. You have created something. And within a short period of time, you're just saying, destroy it. Start all over. Man. Genesis 4 through 9 talks all about how sin had permeated human beings and what that did to the world. So God looked down and there was one man who was faithful to him. And he went down and he got Noah. And he said, Noah, I want you to do something pretty remarkable. Yeah, I know you're 600 years old. I want you to build me a boat. And this boat is so big that you're going to be able to put 2 of every kind of fish or animal or wildlife, whatever, in the boat. I tried to calculate what that was like. How big that boat was. I mean, we've all seen movies and kind of get an idea. Here's something concrete that I understand after watching a day's worth of football yesterday. Any of the stadiums that had games that were televised, you put that boat and it would fit inside that stadium. End zone to end zone, sideline to sideline, and as high as the press box. Now get that, you wrap your head around that, being built by a 600-year-old man. No wonder Cosby had it right when he was given his little skit on Noah. What? You want me to do what? Well, it was pretty amazing. But God said, no, this is what I want you to do. And this is how God responded. After the flood, there were problems. It was almost like God had eradicated sin and had left Noah and his family. But there is something about DNA that it comes through no matter what. And with our spiritual DNA changed into being sinful creatures, it happened with Noah. And after the flood, Noah became a farmer. And he planted a vineyard. And one day, he got drunk on some of the wine that he made from the grapes in the vineyard. So drunk that he passed out. And he's lying naked in his tent. That's pretty schnock. That's pretty wiped out.
We're thinking, golly, Rich, you're really giving us some good encouraging stuff, aren't you? He passed out, naked. And the way his kids responded showed that that DNA was not changed with the flood. One came in, saw his old man lying there, and went out and started talking about it to his brothers. It's like, we don't have the record as to what he said. I'm not even sure that I want to imagine what he said. But the fact that he went out and started talking about it instead of doing something about it was a pretty sad state of affairs. So we have this big bang of damage that sin caused to us, to God's creation. But there's a fourth bang. And this, you want to know what's in here? It's right there. The big bang of God's plan to restore life. That's what this is all about. We just talked about the first 9 chapters. The rest of it is this, right here. After Adam and Eve sinned, became aware of their nakedness, they put fig leaves on. You've seen the artist's rendition of that? God, when he confronted Adam and Eve, the account in Genesis says that God took away the fig leaves and made clothes for them. Now I want you to think about that for just a minute. Because this is something that I had not considered for years. The clothes came from animal skin. In order to make the clothes of animal skin, an animal had to die. In order for God to start the restoration process in our lives, blood has to be shed. For years, people would offer animal sacrifice. And if we go up about 2/3 of the way through this book, we find out that there was another sacrifice. And it wasn't an animal. It was a man named Jesus, who sacrificed his blood so that you and I could be restored to the way God intends that relationship to be. From the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, we begin to see that God valued human beings. He made us in his image. He put us just a little lower than himself. Think about that for a minute. You, me, the sacrifice that was made. God wants to clothe us, not just in animal skins, but in the very being that started it all off. The big bang, restoration. That's God. Remember the video last week? This is God's story. This is my story. Let us embrace that. Let us understand what that looks like. And everything else that we look at over the next 30-some weeks is based on God's plan to restore us to himself. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.